I woke up groggy, the lingering haze of sleep still clinging to my mind. The dull hum of morning filled my ears, the distant rumble of traffic, the ticking clock by my bedside, the creak of my apartment settling into the day. With a groan, I pushed myself up and swung my legs over the edge of the bed, stretching my arms above my head. My eyes landed on the full-length mirror across the room, the one I'd positioned there out of habit more than necessity. It reflected my small, dimly lit bedroom, the unmade bed, the discarded clothes in the corner. And, of course, it reflected me, but something was off. I couldn't place it at first, just a vague sense of unease creeping up my spine. I blinked the sleep from my eyes and focused on my reflection. There I was, messy-haired, shirtless, dark circles beneath my eyes. But when I reached up to run a hand through my hair, my reflection hesitated. It was just a fraction of a second, almost imperceptible, but enough to make my breath hitch. I lowered my hand, testing it again. I moved my left hand up. My reflection followed, but with that same delay, as if it needed an extra moment to realize what it was supposed to do. I chuckled, shaking my head. Jesus, I need more sleep. Shrugging it off, I went about my morning. A hot shower, a half-hearted attempt at making breakfast, and a quick check of my phone before heading to work. By the time I left the apartment, I had all but forgotten the strange moment in the mirror. But that was only the beginning. That night, as I got ready for bed, I paused in front of the mirror again. Maybe it was paranoia, or maybe some small part of me wasn't willing to let go of the oddity from the morning. I lifted my hand, watching my reflection closely. This time, it moved in perfect sync. A sigh of relief escaped me, just a trick of the mind, a delayed perception, maybe. Shaking my head, I turned off the light and climbed into bed. The city outside murmured its nighttime lullaby, cars whooshing past, distant sirens wailing, the occasional drunken laughter echoing from the street below. I was just about to drift off when a noise made my eyes snap open. A faint, almost imperceptible tap against glass. My breath hitched. It was coming from the mirror. I lay frozen in bed, my pulse thudding in my ears. Tap. It was faint, like the delicate knock of a fingernail against glass. I forced myself to breathe, telling myself it was nothing. Maybe it was a sound from outside, someone knocking on a neighbor's window or a shift in the apartment building's old pipes. But then it came again. Tap, tap, slow, deliberate. I turned my head toward the mirror, my body rigid with unease. The room was dark, but the mirror's surface gleamed faintly, reflecting the dim glow of the streetlights seeping through my curtains. My reflection was there, still motionless just as it should be, but my chest felt tight. Something about the way it lay there, staring back at me, sent a ripple of nausea through my stomach. And then, it blinked. My body remained motionless in bed, but my reflection had blinked first. I scrambled upright with a sharp intake of breath, my sheets tangling around my legs. My reflection followed an instant later, as if realizing it had been caught. My skin turned cold. I fumbled for the lamp on my nightstand, my fingers clumsy with panic. The warm glow flooded the room, and I whipped my head back toward the mirror. Everything looked normal. My reflection sat up exactly as I did. It wasn't delayed anymore. It wasn't doing anything strange. I exhaled shakily, rubbing my temples. It's stress. It's exhaustion. My job had been eating me alive lately, and I hadn't been sleeping well. Maybe I had just imagined it in the haze of near sleep. Still, I didn't turn the light off, and I didn't look at the mirror again before I forced myself to sleep. The next morning, I avoided the mirror completely. I dressed in the bathroom, checked my hair in my phone's front-facing camera, and left for work without a second glance. But no amount of avoidance could stop the unease that had settled in my bones. By the time I returned home that evening, my anxiety had curdled into frustration. I needed to prove to myself that nothing was wrong, that I had let my imagination get the better of me. So I stood in front of the mirror and stared. My reflection did exactly as I did. I raised my right arm, it followed perfectly. I leaned forward, narrowing my eyes, it did the same. I tilted my head, watching the way the dim light caught in my hair. Everything was normal. A long, relieved sigh escaped me. See? I told myself. Nothing is wrong. You're just being paranoid. And then, just as I was about to turn away, my reflection smiled. My lips had not moved. My breath left me in a violent shudder as my stomach twisted into a sickening knot. The thing in the mirror grinned, just slightly, as if it knew a secret I didn't. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the smile melted away, leaving behind my own wide-eyed expression. I stumbled back, knocking into my dresser. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. This wasn't exhaustion. This wasn't stress. Something was wrong, and it was getting worse. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it, that fraction of a second where my reflection had smiled before I did. It hadn't been an accidental twitch, a trick of the light, or an overactive imagination. I had seen it, and now no amount of logic could undo what I knew to be true. Something in the mirror was changing. By morning, my exhaustion was bone deep, my body heavy with unrest. I refused to look at the mirror as I got dressed, relying instead on my phone's camera. The moment I stepped out of my apartment, the tension in my chest loosened slightly, but I carried the unease with me throughout the day. At work, I kept catching glimpses of my reflection in windows, computer screens, even the surface of my coffee. Every time, my heart would lurch with fear, expecting something unnatural. But everything looked normal. By the time I returned home that evening, I was tired of being afraid. I stood in my bedroom, staring at the mirror from a distance. The air in the room felt heavier, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. "All right?" I muttered to myself, forcing my voice to be steady. "You're losing it." I grabbed an old bedsheet from my closet and threw it over the mirror, covering its surface completely. Problem solved. For the first time in days, I felt like I had regained some control. That night, I slept soundly. The next morning, I felt better. The logical side of my brain was already trying to rationalize everything. It was stress. It was sleep deprivation. You let your mind play tricks on you. I was ready to move on. Then I stepped into my bedroom and froze. The bedsheet lay crumpled on the floor. The mirror was bare. I swallowed, my throat dry. I hadn't touched it since last night. I was sure of that. My apartment door had been locked. No one else had been here. My pulse throbbed in my ears as I took a slow, cautious step forward. My reflection stood there as it should. I raised my hand, hesitantly testing it. It followed. I exhaled sharply, releasing a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Maybe the sheet slipped off in the night. Maybe I knocked it over in my sleep. I forced myself to relax. I was being ridiculous. But just as I turned away, I saw something that made my stomach lurch. A handprint, pressed against the inside of the glass. I staggered back, horror creeping up my spine. The print was faint, but unmistakable. Fingers splayed, palms smudged as if something had pressed against the other side of the mirror. My chest tightened. My vision swam. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and snapped a picture. Then, without hesitation, I turned the mirror to face the wall. I didn't care how irrational I looked. I would not let it watch me anymore. I should have known it wouldn't be that easy. Turning the mirror to the wall should have been the end of it. I should have been able to go about my life, pretending nothing had ever happened. But the fear didn't leave me. It sat inside my chest, heavy and pulsing, like something alive. That night, my dreams were thick with shadowed reflections. Versions of myself that moved just a second too slow. Eyes that lingered on me even when I turned away. I woke up drenched in sweat, my room eerily silent. I forced myself to breathe. It's over. It's over. Then I heard it. A slow, deliberate scraping sound. My stomach dropped. I sat up, heart hammering against my ribs. My eyes locked onto the mirror. It had moved. I knew exactly how I had left it. Flat against the wall, completely turned away. But now it was tilted slightly, as if something had pushed at the bottom edge, trying to turn it back around. The breath left my lungs in a silent gasp. I forced myself to move. My legs shook as I stood, inching toward the mirror. My hand hovered over it, hesitant, afraid of what I might see if I turned it back around. The silence in the room was suffocating. With a deep breath, I grabbed the edge and pulled it forward, just enough to reveal my reflection. I should have been standing there, tense, afraid, but I wasn't. My reflection was smiling. Not a normal smile, not a twitch of the lips or a nervous grimace. This was something else entirely, something wrong. My reflection's lips stretched too far, revealing teeth in a way that was almost deliberate. A grin, a knowing, hungry grin. I stumbled back, my heel catching the edge of my bed, and I fell, my back slamming against the mattress. My reflection did not move. It was still standing, still grinning, and then it raised its hand and waved. I screamed. I don't remember knocking over the mirror, but I must have, because the next thing I knew, it crashed against the floor with a sharp, splintering crack. Then silence. I lay there, panting, staring at the broken shards scattered across the floor. My reflection was gone, shattered into a dozen jagged fragments. For the first time in days, I felt relief. It's over. But then, out of the corner of my eye, one of the shards twitched. I didn't move. The air in my room had turned dense, suffocating, like it was pressing in on me from all sides. My eyes were locked on the shattered mirror, my body frozen in place. The shard twitched again. It was a tiny movement, subtle enough that I might have convinced myself it was my imagination. But then another piece shifted, a slow, unnatural slide across the hardwood floor, as if something inside it was breathing. I scrambled backward, my hands gripping the bedsheets. My mind screamed for me to run, to leave, to do anything but sit there and watch. Then, the pieces moved all at once. They jerked and slid, scraping against the floor in a chaotic dance. The shards twisted, tilting upright, realigning themselves, not into a reflection, but into something else. A figure. It was piecing itself together, rising, pulling itself free from the glass like something shedding a second skin. I wanted to scream, but my throat locked up. My limbs refused to obey. The thing from the mirror stood before me now, its form fragmented and shifting, like a living, breathing mosaic of my own shattered image. But it wasn't me. Its movements were wrong, fluid but disjointed, like a puppet controlled by invisible strings. The reflection of my eyes stared at me from different angles, misaligned within the jagged shards. Its mouth, my mouth, was twisted into that same unnatural grin. And then it stepped forward. A sharp, crunching sound filled the room as the glass under its feet splintered further. My body finally reacted, pure survival instinct taking over. I lunged off the bed, scrambling toward the door. The moment my fingers brushed the doorknob, I felt a cold hand grasp my wrist. The touch sent a wave of wrongness through me, like touching something that should not exist in this world. My breath came in short, panicked gasps. "Let go," I choked out. The grip tightened. I dared to look back. The thing's head tilted, its misaligned features shifting. It studied me with a mockery of curiosity, the corners of its mouth twitching as if deciding whether or not to speak. And then, in my own voice, it whispered, "Why are you running?" I wrenched my arm away with all the strength I had, throwing myself out of the room and slamming the door behind me. My heart thundered in my chest. Silence. Then, a single, deliberate knock on the other side of the door. Tap, tap, tap. It was waiting. I backed away from the door, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My wrist still burned where it had touched me, where I had touched me. The air in my apartment felt different now, heavier, as if something had seeped into the walls, poisoning the space around me. The knocking had stopped, but I knew it was still there. I needed to get out. I grabbed my phone from the kitchen counter, my hands shaking as I scrolled through my contacts. Who could I even call? The police? What would I tell them? That my reflection had climbed out of a broken mirror? That it was standing in my room, waiting? They'd think I was insane. Maybe I was. My eyes flicked toward the hallway. The bedroom door was still closed. No sound, no movement. I should run. I should leave and never come back. But something deep inside me whispered that it wouldn't matter. It would follow. I had to end this. Slowly, I moved toward the door. I pressed my ear against it, listening. Nothing. I swallowed hard. My fingers trembled as I gripped the doorknob. With a deep breath, I twisted it open. The room was dark. The only light came from the street lamp outside, casting an eerie glow across the floor. Shattered glass still littered the ground. My bed, my dresser, everything looked the same. Except for one thing. The mirror was back on the wall. I stopped breathing. It wasn't cracked anymore. The glass was whole, flawless, as if it had never broken in the first place. But I knew better. Something was waiting inside it. I stepped closer, my heart pounding in my ears. My reflection stood there, staring back at me, perfectly still. I raised my hand. It followed. I took a deep breath and whispered, "What do you want?" For a moment, nothing happened. Then it blinked. My stomach clenched. I hadn't blinked. A slow, terrible grin spread across its face. My own face. Then, in a voice that was both mine and not mine, it said, "I want out." My knees nearly buckled. I stumbled back, shaking my head. No, you're not real." The reflection cocked its head. "Aren't I?" Then it took a step forward. Not inside the glass. Out of it. The surface of the mirror rippled like liquid as the thing stepped through, its form shifting, solidifying. I ran. I didn't think. I just ran. Bursting out of my apartment, I sprinted down the hallway, my bare feet slamming against the floor. My pulse pounded in my skull. I didn't stop to grab my keys. I didn't stop to look back. But as I reached the stairwell, I heard it. A whisper, right behind me. "You can't run from yourself." I flew down the stairs, barely aware of my own body as panic took control. My breath came in short, ragged gasps, my bare feet stinging against the cold steps. I didn't know where I was running, only that I had to get away. But deep down, I knew. I wasn't running from a stranger. I was running from myself. I burst into the lobby, nearly colliding with the glass doors. My hands fumbled for the handle, yanking it open as I stumbled onto the empty street. The city lights flickered, the neon signs casting strange shadows onto the wet pavement. I didn't stop. I ran. Street after street, block after block. I kept moving, hoping that if I ran far enough, fast enough, I could escape. But something inside me whispered that it wasn't possible. Not when I could feel it watching me. I dared to glance over my shoulder, and there it was, standing at the far end of the street, completely still, completely me. It wasn't running. It didn't have to. It knew I couldn't escape. I turned a sharp corner, ducking into a narrow alley, my lungs burning. My mind raced. What was I supposed to do? How did I fight something that wore my face? I stopped next to a dumpster, pressing my back against the cold brick wall, forcing myself to breathe. Think. The thing had come from the mirror. That was the only connection I had to it. Maybe if I destroyed every mirror, every reflection, I could cut off its link to me. But how? My apartment mirror had already broken once, and yet it had still returned whole, untouched. That meant it wasn't the mirror that was broken. It was me. The realization sent a wave of nausea through me. This wasn't about glass or reflections. The thing hadn't just crawled out of the mirror. It had crawled out of me. A sound echoed through the alley. A soft, slow tapping against concrete. Footsteps. I clamped a hand over my mouth, my entire body tensing. The air grew heavier, colder. A shadow stretched along the pavement, growing closer. Then that voice. My voice. "You can't hide forever." The world tilted. My pulse pounded in my ears. I was out of time. There was only one thing left to do. I had to face myself. I forced myself to move. My muscles screamed in protest, every instinct telling me to stay hidden, but I knew it was useless. I stepped out of the shadows, into the dim glow of a flickering street lamp. The reflection, my other self, stood at the mouth of the alley, watching me. It didn't blink, didn't breathe. It just waited. I swallowed the fear clawing up my throat. "What do you want from me?" The thing tilted its head, a slow, unnatural motion that sent a shiver down my spine. Then, in my voice, it whispered, "I want what you took." A cold weight settled in my stomach. "I didn't take anything," it smiled. A slow, terrible smile. "Didn't you?" I opened my mouth to argue, but something about its tone, something underneath the words, made me hesitate. Took a step forward. I took a step back. "Do you remember?" It whispered. My breath hitched. "Remember what?" The thing's expression didn't change, but the air around me did. It was like the night itself had tilted, shifting reality just slightly, enough to make the world feel wrong. And then, I did remember, flashes of something buried deep, something I had forced myself to forget. A mirror, a choice, a version of me left behind. A sickening realization settled in my chest. The thing standing in front of me, the one that had crawled out of the glass, it wasn't just some reflection. It was me, the me I had abandoned, the me I had left trapped. "You took my place." The words sent ice through my veins. My legs threatened to buckle. No, this wasn't possible. This wasn't real. But the memories whispered otherwise. I had made a deal. I had stepped away from the mirror that night, walked into a world that was supposed to be mine. But I had left something else behind, something that had waited in the darkness, watching. And now, it had come to take back what belonged to it. It took another step forward. I took another step back. My heart pounded, panic rising in my throat. "You don't deserve to be here." The words wrapped around me like chains. I could feel it now, that pull, that deep, aching feeling that I had lived a life that wasn't mine. Because it wasn't. I had stolen it. And now, the thing from the mirror, the real me, was here to set things right. It reached out, and this time I couldn't run. Its fingers brushed my arm, and a shock of cold surged through my body. It wasn't just a chill. It was something deeper, something that unraveled me from the inside out. I gasped, stumbling backward, my vision blurring for a split second. My other self, the one I had abandoned, watched me with dark, empty eyes. "Do you feel it?" It whispered. I did. A pull, like an invisible thread tightening around my soul. The longer I stood here, the more I understood. I had been living on borrowed time. Memories I had ignored, memories that weren't supposed to be mine, began to surface. The life I had lived, it had never fully belonged to me. It was always half-formed, like a shadow stretched too thin, because the real me had been waiting in the dark. "You should never have left." I clenched my fists. I didn't know. I don't remember making a choice. The thing smiled, twisted, knowing smile. "But you did." And then it showed me. The world ripped open in my mind, a flood of memories cascading through me. A night long ago, a mirror, cold and silent, a whisper in the dark, promising a way out, a desperate version of me reaching through the glass, grasping at an escape without knowing the cost. And I had stepped away. The reflection had stayed behind, but I had stolen its place. My knees nearly buckled. I pressed my hands to my face, my skin damp with sweat. I didn't know," I whispered. "I didn't know it was real." The thing, the real me, watched in silence. "It doesn't matter." The air in the alley thickened, pressing down on me. My limbs felt heavy, my breath shallow. I realized, with dawning horror, that the moment I had left it behind, it had never stopped pulling me back. This was inevitable. There had never been an escape. I was always going to return. A surge of resistance flared inside me. "No," I gasped, shaking my head. "No, I have a life now. I have memories. Memories that aren't yours." The words struck like a dagger, because I knew it was right. Every moment of my life had been a borrowed lie, a reflection pretending to be whole. I sucked in a sharp breath. "So what happens now?" My other self took one last step forward until we were eye to eye. "Now you go back." And before I could move, before I could resist, it grabbed me. The moment its fingers locked around my wrist, my world fractured. The alley dissolved. The cold night air vanished. The ground beneath me disappeared. And suddenly, I was falling. Not down, not up, just inward. The world twisted around me, like I had been pulled through an invisible thread in the fabric of reality. Colors bled into each other, black, silver, endless white. I tried to scream, but there was no sound, no body, just the sensation of being dragged. And then, stillness. I opened my eyes. I was standing in a room that wasn't a room. Everything was colorless, hazy, as if made from swirling mist. The walls weren't solid. They stretched infinitely in all directions, vanishing into a horizon of nothingness. And in front of me, a mirror, not cracked, not broken, perfect. It was the only thing in this space that had definition, standing tall and ominous. And inside it, I saw my other self. But this time, it wasn't just a reflection. It was me, standing on the other side, looking out. A sickening realization crashed through me. I was back where I started. This was the inside of the mirror, and I was the one trapped now. I slammed my hands against the glass. No, no! My reflection, the real me, smiled from the other side. A slow, knowing smile. It raised a hand, my hand, and pressed it against the glass. I felt nothing. "Don't worry," it said softly. My own voice distorted through the barrier. "I'll take good care of our life." "No, wait." I pounded against the surface. "You can't." But it was already turning away, walking into the world that used to be mine. And I was left behind. I screamed. I hit the glass over and over again, but the surface didn't so much as shudder. The mirror was solid, unyielding. The last thing I saw before the world outside faded, before the mirror darkened, was myself, living the life I stole, disappearing into the world. And me? I was nothing but a reflection, trapped, waiting, just like before. And sooner or later, someone else would look into the mirror, and I would be watching. Time doesn't move here, not in the way it should. There is no morning, no night, just the endless gray mist stretching in every direction, shifting like breath against the glass. And me, I wait. First I screamed. I pounded against the mirror, begged, pleaded to be let out. But there was no one to hear me, no cracks to escape through, because I was on the wrong side. I watched as my other self stepped into the life that used to be mine. I saw through the mirror's surface as they walked my streets, spoke with my voice, became me. And the world never knew. Days blurred into weeks, then months. I don't know how long I've been here. Years? Decades? But time doesn't matter. Not anymore. Because eventually someone will come. A person will stand before the mirror, adjusting their tie, fixing their hair, not thinking twice. And I will be here, waiting, because that's how it works. That's how it's always worked. I am not the first. I won't be the last. The mirror is patient, and so am I. I place my hand against the glass, and I wait for the next one to take my place.